Greetings, YouTube. I'm seeing my dietitian today, so I thought that was the perfect shirt to wear. In the last week, I gave a read of a Rules Light retro clone of the old D&D style game. This is the basic fantasy role-playing game. This is the hard copy, which I got for $5 off of Amazon, so it's a good deal. I'm not going to pick on this game. I'm just going to be using this as an example because it's the latest Rules Light game that I have read. The retro clones looking back at the past versions of the game of D&D. Now, there are many people who like this type of game. See how thick that is? It's not very thick at all. And you compare that to this, which is another version of D&D, which is much heavier. And if you look at all of the supplements to this that add options to the characters, I would probably not be able to hold these books in my hands and show them in the video at one time. They would be that thick, maybe that thick. Okay, there's like almost a dozen of them, I think. And there are people who really like this version of the game, and then there are people who like a more medium complexity level, like Radiance, which is pretty much a single book. There's a GM's guide, which is mostly a monster manual. I haven't yet to do a review on that one. I apologize. And having read Basic Fantasy, I realized that there are two things going on here. There is a desire to play the old games out of nostalgia. That's over here. And then there is a desire for a Rules Light game, and that's over here. And that these are two different things going on. And they actually aren't connected in any way. And I'm going to say something that may be conceived as controversial. And that is that the old school games, the ones that were played back in the 70s and 80s, may have had fewer rules, but that they were not rules light. And here's my reasoning. They have fewer rules, but there was an entire body of virtual rules that came with those games. And those virtual rules lived either inside the GM's head, or, if the person was particularly pedantic, in codified house rules. I'm particularly pedantic. When I had I had a 3rd edition campaign once, I actually had house rules all written up, so that I could just email them to people and say, here, these are the house rules. And they were changed over time. I knew people, or know people, who by the time 3rd edition came out had hundreds of pages of house rules. Codified rules that they needed in addition to these, because the game didn't have those rules in it. And they had encountered situations and problems where they needed to add rules to the game to get it to run the way they wanted it to run. And anyone who's read the old issues of Dragon Magazine will tell you that issue after issue after issue, there were people talking about alternative rules and additional rules and things that were missing or were wrong. And we spent years discussing all the things that the game didn't get right, or we didn't understand, or we thought were lacking, and that we had to add them in. Dozens and dozens of authors wrote articles about this. People sent letters in by the hundreds. This is back in the era before the internet. Alright? So, they weren't complete. And I know that people get upset when I say that, but the games weren't complete. And there are people who are okay with making, ad hoc, on-the-fly decisions about stuff. Cool if you like that kind of thing. For those of us that don't like that kind of thing. And so a game like this doesn't meet our needs. But more importantly, I'm arguing that this is not rules light either. And I'm going to give you an example. And again, I'm not picking on this game in the sense of saying, oh, it's horrible, it's horrible. It's not horrible, it's not horrible. It is just an example of, if I can find the little listy thingy I'm looking for. I'm sure I should have thought of this before, shouldn't I? I can't freaking find it. I apologize. It's the saving throw chart. Now, in the old school, there were 5 saving throws, okay? And the 5 saving throws were weird, like poison, dragon breath, or death effects, or there were these 5 rather disconnected ideas that didn't seem to make a lot of sense, and there were occasions when we would just kind of stick things into them because, well, frankly, we didn't have any place else to stick those saving throws because there wasn't any consistency. Why the heck am I not following them? Well, here's one. Dwarves save at +4 versus Death Ray or Poison, Magic Wands, which is separate, Paralysis or Petrify, and Spells, and have a +3 versus Dragon Breath. There was a specific saving throw against Dragon Breath, okay? But there were 5 of them. Along come 3rd edition, and they trimmed that down to 3. A saving throw for resisting things with your will. 1, because you're very dexterous and could dodge things. And 2 and 3, because you were just a tough SOB and you could take a bit of poison or something like that. So 3, if you're a math whiz, is fewer than 5. And yet this retro clone, which is looking back at the old style games and is purporting itself to be rules light, has 5 saving throws. That's not rules light. Not to mention, there are lots of restrictions in the old style games, which I personally don't like. You have to have stat minimums to meet a class, stat minimums to meet a race. You regenerate things randomly, which means you may not have any stats that you can use for anything at all. You can roll your hit points randomly, and if you're a mage, you could end up with 1, and if you're lucky, you might have 4. Hope you like one-up characters, because you're going to be doing that. Hope you like playing humans, because you may be playing lots of those as well. And you may be playing really crappy fighters, because you might not meet any other class. There are lots of things about the game that I don't think fall into the category of rules light in the least. Now, I think that there's a desire for people to play a rules light version of D&D. I really do. But I don't think the retro clones are that. I really don't. There are fantasy games out there or games in general that are rules light. If you want to play rules light, folks, play Fudge. It doesn't get much more rules light than that. They're having a Kickstarter at the moment to make official Fudge dice, though well, cool. I don't really need to know if I see a need for official Fudge dice, but that's just me. But there's a dichotomy there between that nostalgia game that they're playing and rules light game that they want to play. Now, if you want to play a nostalgic game, break out the old books. Mine are right here. All my 1st edition books are right within arm's reach. I could start playing that right now if I wanted to. Though at the moment it will only be me and the cats. So if you want to play a game like this, which is free, go get a copy off their system, look at it, enjoy it, feel free to do it. Play it forever. Play it till the sun goes cold. I won't judge you for that. Maybe people are trying to look back at the time when they were 15 or 16 and they were gaming with their friends until 3 a.m. Maybe they're trying to shove that lightning back in the bottle and bring back that era. But don't fool yourself into thinking that this is a rules light game, because it isn't. Just like the games that we played in the past weren't rules light. They were convoluted, self-contradictory balls of mess that had a huge body of virtual rules that either lived in your house rule notes or in a GM's head, and you prayed he remembered everything he did last week. And every game table you went to was a different game. Not just like a different campaign, but the entire rules were differently, because house rules varied from place to place. Which is why sometimes this is nice, because it's consistent. Now, as time has gone by, I will admit that Pathfinder is incredibly complex in its breadth of options. It is huge. It is overwhelming. That's why I like the NPC guide they put out recently, the Codex. And I've come to prefer a game that's what I call medium complexity. As my friend Greg said in reference to the basic fantasy game, you've got everything you need, nothing you don't. Well, I disagree with him. I don't think that game has everything I need and nothing I don't. This is a whole lot closer to everything I need and nothing I don't. Okay, not to mention it's rather cleverly done and has some nice options for your characters, even though it's not a particularly heavy book. And you can get a copy of that for free as well. Go look it out. Go out and take a look at it. I recommend it. So you can get all 3 of these games. Essentially, you can get Pathfinder for free if you go to their, the Pathfinder system resource document. Go ahead and look at them. Compare them. Which meets your needs is up to you. But I beg of you, don't confuse nostalgia with rules light. They aren't the same. So now people are going to ask me, okay, well, if you're thinking about what is a rules light version of D&D, and remember, that's what I'm discussing. I'm not discussing rules light games in general. There are rules light games out there. As I said, Fudge being the one I can think off the top of my head that is the quintessential definition of that. But we're talking about a version of D&D, something that looks like D&D to the person writing it, or considering it at least, and is as simple as you can get. Well, I've been thinking about that. And basing things off of the basic game. I love alliteration, sorry. I've come up with a few ideas. Now, I'm not going to write this out into an actual game myself. I don't have that particular desire. Besides, I'm not looking for a rules light version of D&D. But I think I can actually develop one, at least in concept, that actually is rules light. That has the minimum things you need to run the game and have it still feel like D&D. I've got some notes right here. I made some notes. Far more notes than I normally make, and I need to kind of get them into order because they make a little more sense at the moment. They're just as my thoughts came. I threw them onto a page. And I'm actually going to do a video about that at some point, hopefully in the next couple of months. But I get myself into this conversation all the time. And people tell me that the old school games are what they need because they're rules light. And I'm telling you, they weren't. I was there. I was in those gaming trenches. I remember all the things that the game didn't have. The convoluted, self-contradictory, arbitrary crap that we had to deal with. Can't have more than 3 Rangers in a group. Why the fuck not? And alignment languages. Oh, alignment languages. Things like that were everywhere. Different mechanisms to do different things in the game instead of having a unified mechanic. They weren't rules light, folks. They just had fewer rules written down on the pages. And there's a difference. So I hope I haven't pissed too many people off, but this is something I really needed to talk about, and here you go. So, I'm looking forward to what people have to say. Hopefully they're not going to lambaste me or burn me in effigy. That actually might be intriguing to see if someone actually burned me in effigy. And I'm open to video responses and comments below, and I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think that there actually were old, rules-light versions of D&D? I argue that there were not. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say.